Hello and welcome. Today we will talk about qualities that are essential for a photojournalist. But before we do that, we must first understand what photojournalism is. We discussed documentary photography, social documentary photography, and street photography in the last episode. Photojournalism is different from all of these by the fact of its timeliness, objectivity, and narrative. In photojournalism, the images have meaning in the context of a recently published record of events. This could be a newspaper, magazine, or story on the internet. The situation implied by the images is a fair and accurate representation of the events they depict in both content and tone. The images combine with other news elements to make the facts relatable to the viewer. Photojournalists have 6 major outlets for their work: newspapers, magazines, books, and the internet, where their photographs can be viewed directly by the reader. Wire services and picture agencies are wholesalers and act as middlemen who supply images to different clients. In America, it was picture-oriented magazines like Life, Look, and Collier's that supported the careers of distinguished photojournalists in the 1930s and 1940s. Photographs of anonymous staffers at United Press International and Associated Press did also appear in the magazines. World-class specialized publications like the National Geographic continue to exhibit the work of top photographers. Today, weekly news magazines like Time and Newsweek or Outlook and India Today support news-oriented photography. While the internet is the newest outlet for photojournalists through the World Wide Web, most continue to have widest exposure through wire agencies that distribute photographs to clients globally. There are 3 major wire services that do this: Agence France Presse or AFP, Reuters News Picture Services, and Associated Press. The quality and speed of digital technology makes this an exciting time to be a photojournalist.
If it's groundbreaking news, they need to send an image out as fast as possible. So for example, with sports, they've got their laptop right there on the sidelines and they'll empty their memory card out and transmit. Or it's remote controlled for big events. We actually have, we're set up in a media center at the events and we transmit with the remote control. So they're clicking away and we're getting the images almost instantaneously on our screens. We get them into our system. We choose a couple of the pictures. Once they've filed, we need to caption them, factual checking. We need to do a bit of touching up in Photoshop. Photoshop rules are the same as the darkroom time. So we still go on those bases that we can only touch up, like we do a bit of dodging or color rectification, but nothing else. We cannot eliminate any information or add anything to the images. We refer to the text. We make sure the pictures go with the story. We have a whole range of IPTC fields to fill in, which is for archival purposes. It's to do with keywords, object names, the dates, all of these things to make it easier in the future to search for pictures of a certain subject. Once that's done, we need to select which clients we would send the image to. The clients are, it's done through countries basically, so we select the countries who would be interested in these pictures.
Newspaper or magazine photographs illustrate, educate, delight, and enrage. They bring life, color, and emotion to a newspaper page that would otherwise be grey and stale without them. In this episode, we will talk to multiple award-winning photographer Pablo Bartholomew, who is amongst the top 100 photojournalists of all time. Pablo has been published in the National Geographic, Time, and Newsweek magazines. Photographing for close to 4 decades now, Pablo talked about his work as a documentary photographer in the last episode. Today, he gives us an insight into what it takes to be a successful photojournalist. He began his career at a turbulent time in India's political history with the French-American photo agency Gamma Liaison, where he worked for more than 20 years.
Basically, I started my photojournalistic career in 1983, and it started with, the last months of Mrs. Gandhi being in power, and then the whole Punjab problem emerging at that time. and the cry for Khalistan, and then her sending the troops into the Golden Temple, then being assassinated by her bodyguards, and after which there was Rajiv Gandhi coming to power, Bhopal, the gas tragedy, and then the many natural disasters that happened in Bangladesh. The cyclones, those days cyclones were very frequent in Bangladesh, and then going into, let's say, the whole Ram Mandir issue, and then culminating with the breaking of the demolition of the Babri Masjid.
As Pablo tells us about the challenges of picture taking in a new situation, we will also have more of Maral Degati, photo editor for AFP in Delhi, to give you a view of the dynamics at work in a photo agency. To begin with, what is expected of a photojournalist, either working for a publication or a photo agency that supplies photographs to newspapers and magazines?
A photojournalist for a wire agency, I think it's the dynamism. It's to be able to go out on a daily basis and get some pictures in. Because a wire agency, you have to feed the beast. It's this huge machine that never stops, and is constantly demanding more images, more pictures, because the world is moving faster and faster. So it's about having a determination and a real drive to go out every day and find some pictures, not only on a daily basis, but also to be a storyteller. A visual storyteller with new social media and digital, things available nowadays. It's more and more important to think about the subject and how you tell the story. So yes, aesthetics, which is the more artistic vision, but also, finding that story, the important stories that are out there every day, and doing that as well as going out into the field and on demand, getting some pictures fast, which is not an easy task.
A knowledgeable photojournalist produces pictures that add to the reader's understanding of the community, and a good photo editor would go for an image that is thought-provoking, not just a literal image. So producing good pictures is also a function of editing.
It's very important. It's very important. The photographer will do the preliminary editing. So he's the visual storyteller. He's the one who's been out there. He knows he has the sensitivities of what's actually going on, of the contextual importance, the emotional side, if you wish. And so once we get the pictures as editors, we have to bring value to the images. So we have to look at them globally as a series, if there is a series. Look at the package and see what is being said, the value of each image, of course, but what it brings together as a group of images.
People in Europe look at pictures differently from people in America. Maybe people here in India look at them differently. So it's a function of how the visual aesthetics are looked at in different parts of the world and what they choose. And that's a process, which is beyond your control. In the old days, we never really saw what we shot. So it's always a matter of how the story is edited. With the digital era, you can review and preview what you've shot immediately, but when you were shooting film, in the old days, I would actually send my film out to Paris to be processed to the agency. So one actually never saw many of the pictures until they were run in the magazine. So that's how you knew what you had shot. But you had a sense of where you were and what you were getting.
Captioning often determines the success of one photograph being widely used over others.
At the end of the day, you have to be true and honest to what you saw, what was happening, and the editor could be thousands of miles away, coming completely from a different culture. So you have to use the basics, rules of journalism, which is you describe everything as to how, what, when, where, and you hope that something that you say will have an effect. But at the end of the day, I mean, a bad picture with a wonderful caption is not going to make that fly, and sometimes a good picture without adequate captioning can also lose out. So the idea is to be able to be as good in what you're sending so that all the information is there. Then it's up to the other side to be able to pick on it and use it or not.
It's important for historical information, for archiving. We need to know what the picture's saying. We need to identify every person in the image. We need no spelling mistakes in the images. If a person's name is wrong, then in the future, people searching for this particular person, whether he's a politician, whether he's a sportsman, what have you, if the spelling is wrong, the picture will never be found, and it may be a very important picture. So captioning is crucial.
The dynamics at work between the photography department and the editorial desk is extremely important for photography to maintain its position in both newspaper and magazine journalism.
As a photo editor, you have to constantly be aware of what's going on around you. So listening to what the reporters are writing about, relaying with them on a daily basis, conferring, watching out on what the photographers are sending, where they are, seeing the news on TV, different channels, what they're talking about, and yes, constantly being aware of what's going on around and being able to go up to people and ask, speak to them, ask them what they're working on, and collaborating. So it's all about teamwork, absolutely, but it's also to do with initiative and taking responsibility of doing the job. We work under quite stressful situations, so we don't have one photographer filing. We have anywhere between 1 to 15, 20 on a day-to-day basis, covering all different subjects. So we have to be aware of where these photographers are, what they're saying. So it's very important to know the history of where they are, as well as how each photographer works individually. So when we have to defend our choices, we may decide to choose one picture instead of another, and we have to know why we do that.
There is a variety of situations that photojournalists are called to document. They are spot news situations, general news situations, sports features, portrait and personality. Perhaps the situations that most challenge creativity and the photojournalist's personal ingenuity and courage are of civil strife and conflict zones.
The turf is such that there is danger always involved because you are between the police and the protesters often in many situations, and it's really how you navigate your way to try and find your safe passage, keep your head low, yet be able to perform and bring back the pictures for the viewer. During the Babri Masjid demolition, most of the media was attacked, and I was in a situation where I was being chased by a mob, and they actually surrounded me. And if it hadn't been for another colleague of mine who went and got some police, and there was one woman police superintendent who then came and rescued us, in fact. So she surrounded us and said, I've placed them under arrest and they're going to be taken to the police station, and thereby actually saved us from being lynched by the mob. So you do have situations like that, and it was a close shave.
Situations like this covered by the world media present yet another challenge to a photographer to capture for posterity that one moment that distinguishes his photograph from the rest.
Like in news, often there are multiple versions of the same situation. So for example, there's this picture of a man standing in front of a row of tanks, and that's quite a famous picture from Tiananmen Square. and there are 7 versions of it that I know. But there's one which is the most loaded and uploaded. So those sort of things happen. So, I guess by the nature of something being printed or getting an award, then that image gets more celebrated than the others.
Conflict reporting and war coverage has made the career of many talented photojournalists with the invention of the Leica 35mm rangefinder camera in the 1920s. In fact, it became a favorite of David Douglas Duncan, a staffer with Life who became a famous war photographer. However, even today, the Leica is a camera that some turn to in certain situations.
We allow a scope of individual input, so if people want to use a Leica camera, which normally perhaps isn't correct in a journalistic sense, they can. And then we have, say, photographers who will experiment with digital media. They'll invent new ways of photographing. So in the sports, for example, at the moment with the with the Asian Games, in Shanghai, we have a photographer who's invented this new way of taking underwater photographs, and he's doing really well, and other people are following.
The Leica, which was unobtrusive, light and easy to use, heralded the reportage style of Henri Cartier-Bresson, regarded as the father of modern photojournalism. Cartier-Bresson coined the phrase "the decisive moment" to express his philosophy of picture-taking. However, in a general news situation, what is the decisive moment?
I feel, yes, there is a moment, whether you want to call it the decisive moment or the magic moment or the moment where everything comes together. But again, what is that moment? I mean, many things can be made the decisive moment to suit an editorial purpose. So, I mean, whether it's you want to make a politician look ugly and you photograph him with a bad expression or a finger up his nose, or he's sort of looking distraught.
Cartier-Bresson is described as an expert in capturing that special moment when small incidents occurred. It is an immediate sketch. You can't correct it. If you correct it, then it is the next picture, is how he himself explained it. In photographing the aftermath of the Bhopal gas tragedy in 1984, although a disaster situation, it was a split second captured by Pablo Bartholomew that forever rendered the picture he took its status as an iconic visual representation of the gas leak. The photograph of a father's hands gently brushing mud onto the body of his baby, a victim of the gas tragedy, won the World Press Photo Award of the Year.
Well, it shows a human contact, and that there is, in fact, it's a graphic symbol which then works as a metaphor for, it could be anybody's child, it could be any parent. So in that sense, in fact, I still don't know whether it's a boy or a girl. I mean, there is that question mark for me. So, there is that universal sense to that image. I knew that I was shooting something which was strong and exciting, but what it would then represent later on is a function of editing. It's a bit of an illusion to say that there is a decisive moment. However, there is a point where many things come together and make a picture which can have many complex layers. And that, again, is, it goes beyond reportage or photojournalism. That has to do with the magic of image, which has a greater sort of universal appeal.
Clearly, then, it is much more than just journalistic attributes that make for a successful photojournalist. It is the eye of the photographer that is of the greatest importance, the ability to see a good picture, to relate to the subject, and to understand what image best tells the story.
I remember I was in this helicopter in Bangladesh, and we were going over and the cyclone had hit, and it was a few days after, and suddenly I saw this situation where bodies had beached with animal carcasses, and for me that sort of reminded me of the European master painters like Bruegel and Bosch, where it was really like hell on earth, where you had human bodies and animal bodies all sort of enmeshed, beached. So it just was something that caught my eye, and I asked the pilot if he could go around and make a circle, and I was able to shoot that situation.
Most good photojournalism is a healthy combination of talent, knowledge, empathy, planning, and luck. And in the world of spot news, emergency situations, and natural disaster situations, chance or luck become crucial to taking pictures of action.
There has to be some kind of planning, whether it's planning the kind of equipment you take, the clothing you carry with you, how much of equipment, how light are you going to travel. All those things are determined by what you're going to do. And if it's a photo story that can be planned in terms of structured, you have to make those phone calls and set up some kind of loose people to meet, contact, who can take you through things and places, or just doing background research. But at the end of the day, if you're going into breaking news, there's not much that you can plan, and that's where often the element of luck does play. Was the light right, or the juxtaposition of things. So many of these things, are unplanned, and that's where luck, or sometimes good mistakes happen, and they can also yield interesting images. It's always something which you are going from one situation to the other, and within the march of situations, you do sometimes arrive at a situation which is striking, or it sort of sums it up, or it becomes the definitive image.
Ethics in selecting a photograph must equally come into play as aesthetics and its journalistic component, because every photograph has multiple truths. What do we mean by multiple truths? Simply explained, this means if you photograph a subject from different angles, compositions, or even different lighting, it will tell you more than one thing about them. All photographic situations present multiple truths, but sometimes the truth becomes blurred in situations of internal strife, whether it's the state versus its people or two communities warring with each other. Choosing which photograph to publish amongst the many you have taken affects both subjects and readers, and so it is very important that you present your readers with the most appropriate truth.
It's to do with how you are built inside and how you react to certain things. So if you see injustice, the whole idea is to sort of be able to show that injustice. It's not necessarily to do with A community or B community, or A religion or B religion or C religion. It's just that what is good and bad, and as a human being, there are certain, definitions of what crosses boundaries, and how you hope that by being able to tell a story or do a certain kind of picture, that it may have an impact and an effect, so that there is a change. However, often that's not the case.
Pablo Bartholomew won the World Press Photo Award for the first time at the age of 19 for his photo series on a morphine addict. In representing the daily routine of the Danish woman who was his subject through a series of photographs, he explains what for him was the most appropriate truth.
Her life cycle was really to get up and shoot up and then be in this state or haze that she chose to be. But yet within all of that, there was a human emotion still within her where she could communicate with her pet. And that was important for me to include because it did then show her not just as somebody devoured by the drug, but also still had a human side to her. So it's really how you build. You can shoot pictures, but then if you choose to eliminate something, it has a totally different sense. So it's really beyond the picture making, the editing is a very, very, very important part of the whole process.
Communicating the most appropriate truth to readers also means that photographers must be given appropriate time with their subjects. However, spot news situations seldom allow for that sort of interaction. So, in the midst of emergency and disaster situations where events unfold rapidly, or even in a normal assignment of picture taking, what is the just right ethical theory for photojournalists?
You need to be respectful of what you're photographing, not be exploitative, not be manipulative, and just look at what you're photographing with respect so that that comes through. The humanist side of what you're doing comes through, and that you can communicate that to the viewer.
When it comes to death, for example, and crashes, whether it's train crashes, bus wrecks, there's a lot of situations where one does think, I mean, how important is it to show this? Okay, so there's a severe loss of life, but is it really worth showing all this blood and all these violent images? That's when one does ask that question often, or in gun battles and in war zones. How important is it to show the violence? Because at one point it will desensitize the masses if you show too much of that. So yes, often one does prefer not to show the images and show the less sensational images.
As we conclude this episode, it is worth remembering what Hal Buell, who used to be photo editor with the Associated Press, once said about the photograph. A photograph is a moment in time, memorable, lasting, a fraction of a second, isolated from the many other seconds. It is there forever to consider, ponder, re-examine. Therefore, the value of a journalistic photograph cannot be underestimated because it represents the truth to the viewer. And all that we have discussed in this episode is integral to picture making, something you should remind yourself about when you pick up any of the suggestions for an assignment at the end of this episode. Good luck and goodbye.